So one of the things that some of you may have noticed is there's a bunch of stuff that I haven't told you yet. Like, I haven't actually talked about ecology. I haven't talked about biology. We've talked a little bit about like interactions, and I've kind of showed you the assignment and stuff, but I haven't given you any real information about biology. And part of that is because I really think that it's better for you and everybody if you discover this stuff on your own. It's more fun. But there are some things that I want you to see, and so, oh my God, it's showing me. So, I want to walk you through a couple of things real quick, okay? And the first is that when we talk about biology, and you don't have to write this down, you just write down, just underline, just write down the stuff that I underline. But when we talk about biology, most of you already know this, but in case you didn't, we're talking about living organisms. That's it. Biology is looking at living organisms and how they work. But there's lots of different fields within biology. Some people look at genes. Some people look at how cells work. Some people look at like how trees interact with the soil. And all those different fields of biology have different names. And we are actually exploring one of those fields right now. We're looking at ecology. And ecology looks at the interactions of living organisms. And organisms can interact in two primary ways, right? Living organisms can interact with each other. So one living organism can interact with another living organism. And living organisms can interact with non-living things. And so we're going to be looking at both of those things. And here's what we're really trying to figure out with ecology. What we're really trying to figure out is, just a second. So ecology, what we're really looking at is why are things growing where they do? Why are things growing where they do? And why do they occur in the abundance that they do? So what we're really trying to find out when we think about these interactions is, what is it about the other stuff around an organism that determines where it grows and how much of it there is? Okay? So what do you do when you go someplace and you see a whole bunch of deer? Well, you might think like, well, this is good deer habitat. And if you go someplace else and there's not a whole bunch of deer, then maybe it's not such good deer habitat. What makes something good deer habitat? Well, there needs to be food. There needs to be the right kind of shelter. There needs to be water. And there needs to be not an overabundance of predators. Those all reflect interactions. Deer interact with water sources. Deer interact with the food that they eat. Deer interact with the predators that use them for food. It's those things that determine where the deer are and how many of them there are. If you provide food for an animal, you will increase its abundance. That's an interaction. Yeah?
There's a cool question about that.
Yeah, go right ahead. So this is what we're primarily going to be looking at over the next few weeks. We're going to look at this in the context of a bunch of different things. First, the plants that you all are looking at in your plant portfolio. Second, we're going to be looking at some other things, like we're going to look at aquatic organisms that live in the creek. We're going to look at lichens that grow on trees and branches. And we're going to think about some other things along the way. We're going to investigate some of those things like more intensively than others. One of the things that we need to think about in order to investigate ecology is what kinds of questions can we ask and how might we answer them. So I'm just going to show you, one of the things that I'm going to do is give you lots of examples of this so that as you start coming up with your own questions, you maybe have an idea of how we're going to approach this and how you can approach this. So this is a picture that I took. This is down at Honeyman State Park, which is just south of Florence. Has anybody ever been there? Nice little place, huh? It's really, really cool. And this is one of the lakes. It's a freshwater lake, but it's right by the ocean. And the lake is kind of in the dunes. And I went there a few years ago in September of 2020, right before the big fires came in. This was like Labor Day weekend, right before the fires. And so while I was there, because I'm me, I thought about stuff. Like, we were walking around in the sand and we're just like slipping and sliding. We like stand, you know, if there was a little slope like this, if we stood there, we'd just start sliding down. But these grasses, not only did they not slip and slide around, but we couldn't get them to move if we tried. So one of the things that I was trying to figure out is like, well, how do these dune grasses keep themselves still? There were osprey all over the place, and we were wondering, well, what are they eating, right? What are the osprey eating? My kids were finding newts, so they would find these newts and make little newt homes for them. And as they made the little newt homes, they, I don't want you to, that's for later. As they made their little newt homes, we were like, well, if it's just a sandy lake, like, what's the deal? Where do they live? And the answer is, like, I don't know. I don't know where newts live in a lake. And then the last thing we were wondering is, why are there trees on one side and not on the other side? And we looked at aerial photos, and it turns out there's trees always on the same side over there. Like, all the lakes have the same pattern. Trees on the north, sand on the south. And so we were thinking maybe it's wind. Maybe the wind has something to do with this. Okay, so as you all are starting to develop questions, I want you to just think about a few things. So first of all, part of your assignment for the plant portfolio is to come up with questions about the plants. And I want these questions to be ecological questions, which means they're going to be interactive in nature. You're looking for a question that is addressing an interaction. You have 8 plants that you're looking at. I want you to come up with 8 interesting ecological questions, one for each plant. And I'll show you in a second that, like, I've given you some ideas that you can use to sort of spark what's going on. And then next week, we're actually gonna look at some stuff with plants. We're gonna actually take a question, maybe one of the ones that you came up with, or maybe something different, and try to answer it. And so if you have a question, like those questions that I just showed you, how would you answer it? How do you answer a question, like an ecological question? We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about how you collect data and how you use that data to answer your question. And then I want you to think about what you need for a good question, because anybody can ask a bad question. Why are osprey flying, right? I mean, it's not a bad question. It's just, that's not a question that you would be like, well, let's go collect some data and get the answer. That's not a good scientific question. So one of the reasons that I've emphasized the observations is because that is part of coming up with a question. All good scientific questions start with observations that lead to curiosity, okay? So that's really important. And then one thing that you need in order to start answering your question is you need to know something about what you're looking at, right? So you don't do research to answer your question. You do research to figure out what has already been answered about whatever it is that you're looking at. Your plant portfolio represents research. You're finding out some stuff about these plants. So when we want to know the answer to one of our scientific questions, it often starts with trying to figure out, like, what else do we know about this particular thing, okay? And then we're starting with plants, and actually a lot of our work throughout the year is going to revolve around plants. And the reason is because plants end up being super important. They're sort of the base of a lot of ecological systems, a lot of ecosystems. And they don't move around either. So if we want, like, animals are super fun to look at, but they're a little hard to view. They're hard to track down and they're hard to see. So so we're gonna do a bunch of work with plants because they're easy to work with and they're ecologically really important.